Hi, everybody. Welcome to Saddleback. Have I told you lately that I love you? I've been on an international trip, and I'm coming back home actually today. First place I went was to Illuminations, which was the 10 major Bible translation companies in the world. And they met together, and they had me speak to a group of donors, and we raised over $32 million for Bible translation at that first event. So we can thank God for that. It was a big deal to get the Bible into new languages. Then I went to Saddleback, Berlin, which was the 6th anniversary last Sunday of Saddleback Berlin. And we had over 800 people at Saddleback Berlin, which made it clearly the largest church in the city of Berlin. It was really a big deal, and I was so grateful for that, to see with Pastor Dave Schnitter and all that. Then next, I came here to Rwanda, where I am right now, where we did a pastor's conference, and we did a conference that involved leaders from about 30 different African nations that came in for 3 days. I've spoken for the last 3 days there, and now I'm on my way back home. Now, this next weekend, we start the new series on the life of Jonah. And I've got 4 messages in a row that I'm going to be teaching in the month of November on how to know God's calling for your life and how to fulfill your calling in life based on the book of Jonah. It's going to be a great, great series. This weekend, we have one of Saddleback's favorite, Pastor Doug Fields, my youth pastor for nearly, 100 years. And Doug is coming back to finish up our series on counterculture. And so everybody give a warm welcome to Doug Fields.
So nice. Well, hi, everybody. That is so nice of you. You even remember me. I told my kids, I've been gone so long, I don't know if anybody remember me. I came here, those of you that don't know, I came here when I was 29 years old. I worked here for almost 20 years. I've been gone for about 9. It's been that long. And math is impossible, so that makes me about 42 years old, something like that. But when I was here, I actually had an illness that I didn't talk about a lot. It's been given a new name, and I've been diagnosed with something called rhythmic impairment. And rhythmic impairment means this, that you can't clap and sing at the same time, okay? And so in the 90s, we used to clap, every song was a clapping song, and so it was a struggle. Like some of you that don't have rhythmic impairment, because it affects like 1 in 10,000 people, okay? Just watch this. You can't clap and sing at the same time. Raise your hand. Let me see. No matter where you are, raise your hand. It's not very many of us. Look, okay? And so the rest of you, you walk into church with this like, oh, it's going to be so great. I can't wait to sing. I can't wait to worship. And we walk in like, it is just no fun. These people that raise their hand, leave them alone. We also don't dance at weddings because people call 911, think we're having a seizure, and a whole bit. I recently got back from Africa, and in Africa, they have 3 to 4 hour services that are pretty much all clapping and singing. So it's nice to be here at Saddleback, which feels like home to me, and you only clapped at one song. So I feel like you're moving more into God's will, which is great. But we were in Kenya visiting. My daughter has a ministry to street children. Those that live on the street, they're abandoned, they have no family, they stay alive basically by sniffing glue to numb their hunger and to keep them from being cold. And my daughter has found 25 of these boys who are in like the teenage range, which are often the most difficult to rehabilitate. And she's got these boys connected to a church. She's got them in a loving family, and she's got them educated. And what was interesting about these boys, these Kenyan boys, they are actually very much like American teenagers with one noticeable difference. And the noticeable difference is that they did not have a phone. None of them own a phone. And they weren't antisocial. They weren't off in the corner with their head down. They were playing and laughing and engaging and playing Uno and Go Fish. And it was super heartwarming. And we went into a slum And when we got into the slum, we saw these children, and these children had the most endearing smiles you'd ever seen. And not only did they have endearing smiles, they actually had these very primitive and homemade toys that were just so, interesting to me. Now, they had seen a phone before, but they were pretty enamored with my ability to show them how slow motion works when they were running, and were pretty, enamored by that feature. And the reason I share this experience with you is because we're in this series on countercultural. And when I was there, it just felt so countercultural to how you and I live, because the takeaway for me was that these people experience joy and happiness not based on any material possession, but just by being in the presence of one another. Now, if you've been around Saddleback the last few weeks, you know that today we're in part 4 of a series that is called Countercultural. And the big idea is this: when our culture becomes more and more broken, a Jesus follower is supposed to bring out the best when the world is at its worst. See, rather than you and I fit in to be like culture, what becomes attractive is when something is seen as totally different. And I think, and this is why I'm here, I think that that's something different, something that's really compelling, something that's really attractive, something that's really needed in today's world, is that when people are together, they're present with one another. And this is more difficult than we might actually believe. See, while we were in Kenya, we visited this grandmother's, it's technically a house, but for us it would be more like a shed. It was about 12 by 12. It was made out of hay and cow dung. There was no electricity in it. We sat on kind of this makeshift furniture, which was really wood with fabric over it. And we shared with this sweet elderly grandma for a couple hours. And as we were leaving, she had just her smile was beaming. She had tears in her eyes. And she said, "Will you come back tomorrow when you can stay longer?" And I'm thinking, we were there for 2 hours. I'm actually walking out with my leg had cramped up. I have splinters in my butt. I'd rather be back at church trying to clap, than be there longer. But if you have your outline, what I want you to do is I want you to fill in this first blank. This is the countercultural concept that I want you to consider. It's this: the presence influences happiness. Would you say that with me? Presence influences happiness. And we all know this experientially, right? I mean, that when you're with someone and that person isn't paying attention to you. Some of you are like, "Doug, I call that marriage." But you're with somebody and they're not paying attention to you, and they're distracted, or they're looking past you, or they're looking at their phone. You're not happy, right? You actually feel unimportant. I was reflecting to a conversation I had on this property several years ago with another pastor friend. This pastor is no longer on staff, but he was my boss at the time. And we were having this kind of a serious conversation, but he kept looking over my shoulder. And I'm staying engaged in the conversation, but I could tell he was half on me and half on something behind me. So finally I turn around, and there was a hot dog cart. And he said, "Hey, Doug, let's go get a hot dog." And I don't like being second place to a wiener, and that's kind of what I found. But, all of us in here, we have experienced that. You know what it's like to be with somebody but not really be with somebody. Who's experienced that? Let me see your hands. Yeah, absolutely. There's some really interesting and compelling research that is coming out of Cornell University that is able to quantify what you and I know intuitively. See, they've done some amazing research about how presence actually influences happiness. And I'll skip all the boring part of the research and just get right to the part where they test people with chocolate, okay? you have my attention, I'm in, all right? So what they did is they brought all these people in at different times individually. They told them that all these little slices of chocolate were all different types and all rare types of chocolate, and they asked them to evaluate each slice of chocolate. But the truth was the chocolate was all the same. It was all from the same bar. They didn't know that, but what they did, the researchers then, sometimes they paid attention to the subject and they were really engaged with them and present. And at other times, they were kind of walking away, writing on a clipboard, looking down at their phone. And every time the researcher was present with the person, they evaluated the chocolate high. Every time the person was distracted or looking away, they gave the chocolate lower rates. So the takeaway is that presence actually amplifies an experience. And I don't have to tell you that. We learn this at an early age. I can remember one time standing right down here after a church service, talking to somebody, and my son, who was maybe like 3 at the time, was right over there, and maybe 4, there was a bulletin on the ground, a church bulletin, and he was doing this. He was jumping over the church bulletin. And I'm talking to this person, he goes, Dad, hey, Dad, watch this, Dad. Okay. Now, super cute, not a bright kid, but why is it that he wanted to engage me? Why is it that he wanted me to experience that with him? Because he learned at an early age when somebody else is involved. It's just way more delightful. Now, friends, this idea of presence, it's not an African value. It's not a value that's been validated by chocolate research. It's actually a God value. Presence actually has deep theological roots. I mean, think about it. It was God's presence that created this whole cosmos, this world that we live in. And then God wanted to be with us so much, he wanted to be present with us. What does he do? God comes in the form of Jesus. We know this is the incarnation. Look at your notes, they're up on the screen. John 1:14. So the Word, meaning Jesus, became human and made his what? Home among us. Then, after the God-man, Jesus, walks on the earth, he has this ministry that we now follow, and he dies and resurrected, and he leaves us a promise. The promise of his what? Yeah, his spirit or presence, both would be correct. Okay, his spirit or his presence. And look at Ephesians 3:16-17. It says, I pray that from his glorious unlimited resources, he will empower you with inner strength through his spirit. Then Christ will make his what? Home. There it is. His home in your hearts as you trust in him. Now, friends, you can't be much more present than living within. That God making his home in our lives is one of the greatest biblical promises that we have. So if presence is actually a God value, the logic then becomes, well, then shouldn't it be an us value as well? Shouldn't we place the importance of presence in our life? And now some of you may be going, okay, well, yeah, but I don't see how that's countercultural. I mean, I'm present with people all the time. Okay, good for you, Spanky. But for the rest of us, this is actually a picture of our culture today. Okay? That's our current culture. This is the new normal. We're no longer knee to knee, eye to eye. We're now knee to knee and eye to screen. You see this everywhere you go. I've actually taken hundreds of pictures like this one. I've taken it like all over our county just to prove it. I blurred the faces out, and I'm only showing you one because my thought was, a lot of people go to Saddleback, and you could actually be here tonight, and I don't want you to beat me up, although I think I could take this guy. Well, definitely her. But so this idea is, it's not just married couples, it's friends and friends. It's parents and children. Actually, when it's parents and children don't have a device, to me, this is one of the most painful images that I see, and I see it every day, every restaurant you go to, right? So this has become so culturally acceptable to us, so culturally acceptable that for many of you, you might even go, is it really that big a deal? Well, actually, it's a very big deal. The American Psychological Association has developed this new term called technoference. And technoference is the interference of technology in relationships. That it's affecting how we relate to one another. Now, you're 100% free to disagree and be totally wrong. And you know, when you get to heaven, you'll see that I'm right. And speaking of heaven, I love this little cartoon. Most of us new arrivals seem incapable of conversation. They just stare at their hands in despair. Right? It was just 12 years ago that we became enamored with this little device. And it's like we took a nap and we woke up from this nap, and now all of a sudden we have a culture and a condition that has created higher levels of isolation than ever before. I mean, every single day there's a new study coming out connecting phone use to growing levels of depression and loneliness. It was just 12 years ago, in 2007, Steve Jobs was introducing the smartphone. He said this: every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. I don't think he had any idea of how true that statement would be. I'm just curious, I'm doing a little survey. How many of you have one of Steve's phones, the Apple? Let me see, okay? How many of you have one of the other lesser versions, okay? Yeah, definitely the minority. But for those of those of you that have Androids, be careful where you're sitting because they've been known to explode. So be very very careful here. But here's the deal: it's so little. I mean, it weighs less than 5 ounces. It's so small, yet it's so big in its impact of keeping you and I from actually being present with one another. See, here's my thought, is that when we're so connected out there, that we actually become disconnected right here. Does that make sense? Okay. And so, I'm curious, how many of you actually think this is like a real issue? This is a real issue. Let me see. Yeah. I am not needing to convince you. And by the way, it's not a millennial or a Gen Z issue. This is an old person issue as well. And for those of you who prefer to live in the land of it's not that big a deal, let me just tell you, the same people that make these devices are now coming out with ways for us to monitor its usage. Now, if you think about it, that's the equivalent of cigarette companies putting cancer warnings on their labels. This is a big deal. Last year, Apple's CEO revealed the newest operating system would now focus on how much time people are actually spending on their phone. Or as my wife joked, they sold us a bomb, and now they're teaching us to dismantle it. Because you raised your hand quickly because this bomb, it's blowing up attention spans. It's blowing up memory and creativity and stress and exercise and sleep and relationships. And a couple months ago, Pastor Rick gave an excellent message on digital distractions. And if you didn't listen to that, I encourage you to go listen to it, because he talked actually about how to use the phone to increase spiritual intimacy. And what I want to do is I want to take a little bit of a different angle and talk about how this little device in our current culture actually negatively influences presence. And I want to be clear that I'm not anti-technology at all. Okay? I've got a desktop, I've got a laptop, I've got an iPad, I've got an iPhone, I've got an Instagram account, I've got Twitter. If you want to be in the center of God's will, you can follow me at Doug Fields. And on my Instagram account, I will share pictures of my granddaughter like this one. Come on, that's the cutest kid you've ever seen. If you don't like that, you're insane. So hear me clearly. I just want to go on record saying I'm not anti-technology. I'm not asking you to become Amish and, flee electricity. Okay, that's not it. You're all welcome to keep your AOL account. All right, so I'm just, really what I'm asking is that you be honest. That's what I'm asking. You just be honest enough to look at how your phone use is impacting your ability to be present, which is actually impacting other people's happiness. And I'm not advocating for phone abstinence. I'm actually advocating for phone consciousness. See, I want you to be aware so you know the difference between your phone and a pretzel. Okay? Now, that'll make sense as soon as you watch this lady feeding a pretzel to a bird. Watch.
Lo måste vi det göra med akşam.
It's just my favorite. Here, should we see that again? Yeah. Instead of throwing the pretzel, she actually throws the phone to feed the bird. Here.
Lo måste vi det göra med akşam.
Yeah. I don't know what she's saying, but it can't be good. So here's the reality. Without you and I thinking, without us thinking about it, what actually happens is we just become like our culture. Okay? In Romans 12:2, Pastor Rick told me ahead of time that this is the theme verse of this series. It says, "Don't be so conformed to culture that you fit into it without thinking. Instead, let God transform you by changing the way you think." Don't be so conformed that you fit in without thinking. I'm just asking you to think. And I realize some of you in here, you're not so sure you want God to transform the way you think. Maybe some of you are here, you've been invited by a friend, you're checking out this whole God thing, you're dating somebody and they're forcing you to be here. You're sincerely investigating Jesus. And if that's true, I just want to let you know I'm thrilled that you're here. I really am thrilled that you're here. I don't think this is a Christian versus a non-Christian issue. I actually think this is a relational issue. Okay, it's a relational issue. Basically, is smartphones are making us dumb in relationships. Watch this.
Really?
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 Really? So, as human beings, designed by God to be relational, I gotta believe that we're better than this. So how do we become countercultural to be more present? How do we become countercultural to be more present so it increases or influences others' happiness? How do we become countercultural to give attention to people over apps and incoming texts and notifications? How do we do this when there's no scripture that says, "Thou shalt limit your phone use"? So what do? Well, we look to Jesus. Okay? And as we look to Jesus, I think you're going to see the connection, something kind of interesting. And in Luke chapter 2, starting in verse 41, it says this: every year Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. When Jesus was 12 years old, they attended the festival as usual. After the celebration was over, they started home to Nazareth, but Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents didn't miss him at first because they assumed he was among the other travelers. But when he didn't show up that evening, they started looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they couldn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem and searched for him there. 3 days later, they finally discover him in the temple, sitting among the religious teachers, listening to them and asking questions. All who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. His parents didn't know what to think. "Son," his mother said to him, "why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been frantic, searching for you everywhere." "But why did you need to search?" Jesus asked. "Didn't you know I must be in my Father's house?" But they didn't understand what he meant. Which, I have things in common with Mary and Joseph. Because sometimes I read something that Jesus said, and I'm like, I don't understand what he said. Just like that. Let me give you context to these 9 verses. They were traveling from Nazareth to Jerusalem. It was the annual Passover festival. And that annual Passover festival, every Jewish male was expected and required to attend. It's about a 5-day journey. And in these first few verses, there's something going on there that there's a whole parenting issue that I'm not even going to address. I'm not sure what to do with. It's obvious helicopter parenting wasn't around during that time. They would not, in today's culture, would not win any awards for Parents of the Year, misplacing your child for 3 days. I actually think we need to give them a break. Can you even imagine, those of you that are parents, being Jesus's parents? You'd be like, "Oh, Jesus. You think you know everything, don't you?" Kind of do, Dad. Yeah, I kind of do. But in this text, did you notice what Jesus was doing? Okay, this is what I want you to fill in. Jesus was listening and asking questions. He was listening and asking questions. He was in the moment. He was present. He was engaged with people. And by the way, those of you that have read the Bible, you know that this is a reoccurring theme in the life of Jesus. See, for Jesus, people were priorities. And listening is one of the ways that we prioritize people. Not listening while texting, not listening while scrolling through your social media apps, not listening and looking for notifications, but listening. And we've all heard that listening is the language of what? Yeah, love. Why? Here's the next fill-in. Because listening validates people as valuable. A couple weeks ago, Pastor Rick connected listening with kindness. And so the bottom line of this is that I'm not loving you when you're in my presence, and I'm actually negatively influencing your happiness when I'm interacting with my phone when we're together. It's actually, this is just another form of a hot dog, right here, okay? And so we have, in our culture, we have conditioned ourselves that every time our phone buzzes or beeps, that we are obligated by law, to give it our attention, right? And now we have even freedom to be more obnoxious because our texts can show up on our watch. And, Pavlov would have a fabulous time with this social conditioning that we're here. Someone said, I found this week, checking your phone is like picking your nose. There's nothing wrong with it, but no one should have to watch you do it, okay? And so when we do this, here's what we're doing. We're putting a value on the unknown as more important than who is known. Are you tracking? Does that make sense? We put a value on the unknown of what might be beeping, more important than who is right there with us. And we all know what this looks like, to be on the receiving end of this. Okay, and it's not just restaurants, but you see it in restaurants every single day. Okay? Now, thankfully, we're beginning, just at the beginning edges, to see some cultural pushback to this. There's actually a new term out called phubbing, which is a combination of phone plus snubbing. The act of snubbing someone in a social setting by looking at your phone instead of that person. It used to be, 2 decades ago, it was say no to drugs. Today, it is say no to phubbing. Okay? Apparently, drugs are fine now, but so what I would say is that 99% of the texts or social media notifications that come your way can wait until you're done being present with that person. How many of you would agree with that? Yeah, well, yeah, it's so easy to agree with. And it is, and as people who are Jesus followers, we value people, the anticipation of what could be is not more important than who is. Okay? Jesus communicated this truth to Martha. Martha was complaining one time about her sister Mary was sitting, listening to Jesus talk when Martha wanted Mary to be working in the house. And in Luke chapter 10, Jesus says to her, "My dear Martha, you're worried and upset over all these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her." See, Jesus is making a statement about value. He's making a statement about priority and importance. Hey, Martha, what's on the stove is not more important than who's in the house. Friends, what's in your pocket or in your purse is not more important than who's in your presence. Okay. Now, earlier we saw that Jesus was listening and asking questions, and here's what's wild to me. Jesus actually had no reason to ask questions. I mean, think about it. Jesus had no reason to ask questions. Why? Tell me. He knew he was God. Okay, he was God. You're not surprising him. But Jesus understood. I mean, here's what we know about him. In John 2, it says, no one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. But Jesus obviously understood that questions communicate concern. Okay? You want to love people? You want to increase their happiness? You ask them questions, because questions communicate concern. It's that one of the primary ways you engage a person's heart is to dig below the surface, because there's always something going on there. There's always more to discover and more to love. And here's what I've observed in people. One is that most people like to talk about themselves. It's their favorite subject. And most people are actually not good at asking questions. You want to be countercultural? Ask questions, because questions communicate concern. I've been doing a lot of marriage type stuff, speaking and writing and different things about marriages. And one of the reasons that we have one of the highest divorce rates in the country, at about 71% in Orange County, is that, and a lot of people that are staying together have what I would call average or below average marriages. And one of the reasons is because you've stopped asking engaging questions of your spouse, other than, what did you do today? Your spouse, your partner has new dreams and ideas and hopes and fears and desires, and your job is to uncover them as opposed to assuming that you know them. And if you're a parent, your presence matters so much to your kids. Your child is changing every single day, and you are loving them with your interest. You're loving them with your questions. Grandparents, the same way. And it's not just being physically present at the house. It's being free of distractions. Yeah, I was telling my daughter this, who had our granddaughter about 1.5 years ago. You only have 936 weeks from the time she's born until she graduates high school. 936 weeks. Minutes matter. So you ask questions. Now remember when Jesus is at the temple, the parents find him and they're frustrated, and Jesus says, I don't know what you're all concerned about. And he said, he says, I must be in my Father's house. Now, I like the New King James Version, and this is what I want you to see here. What he says is this: did you not know I must be about my Father's what? Isn't that good? See, friends, this is what I'm getting at, is I actually think listening and asking questions is our Father's business. And if we're going to be countercultural in a world that does none of that, we have to become excellent at listening and asking questions. I want to get better at this, and I want this for you too. I'm just curious, how many of you would say you'd like to learn to be more present? Any of you? Okay. How about you came with somebody who needs to be more present? Let me see that one. Okay. Yeah. And see if I could start some fights when I'm back. Okay. So let's kind of transition a little bit to the practical. Let me just tell you what I've been thinking about for a while. Here we'll start here with number one is you need to, if you want to be about your Father's business and listen and ask questions and be countercultural, you evaluate your why. Evaluate your why. Take a little time to ask the significant why question. More specifically, why do you reach for your phone? Why? Why do you engage in what I call looping? Looping is check email, check Instagram, check Twitter, check Instagram stories, do it again. Okay, Snapchat, whatever it is, that's looping. Why do you do that? Now, when you talk to most people, here's what they say: is I'm bored, or I just want a fun distraction. Okay? You dig a little deeper, what we realize, I think, is that most of us, we don't like to be still. Because stillness is synonymous with boredom, and phones make it super easy for us to not ever be alone with our thoughts. And if you've been around the church environment for a while, and many of you have, we know in Psalm 46, it says, be what? Still. Not just be still, but be still and know that I am God. See, if you are a follower of Jesus, can I tell you that stillness is a virtue? Stillness is food to strengthen your faith. It's big. Those of you that are parents, I wrote a little workbook called Parenting in a Screen-Saturated Culture. And the very beginning of the workbook is just to face, for parents, you have to face your own why here, because we can't expect children to be discerning in an area where parents are not. Okay? So we have to just kind of hold up the mirror and say, why? Why do we reach for this? Why can't I just be alone in my thoughts? Why do I have to be distracted all the time? It's not pleasant when we get there. The second is this: then we identify your relational values. And the challenge here is, when was the last time you really thought about what kind of relational person you want to be? What kind of friend, what kind of spouse, what kind of parent, child, grandparent, coworker? And actually articulate it and write it down. What kind of legacy do you want to leave? You know, I don't want to leave a legacy where I'm remembered for my work. You know, Doug Fields, he was a speaker and a writer. Okay? I don't want to be remembered. I mean, look, people don't read my books while I'm alive. They're not going to read them when I'm dead, so I don't have a lot to worry about. But I want to be remembered by loving Kathy well, my children well, my friends well. And I think you want the same for you. So, write it down, articulate it, because watch this. When your relational values become your convictions, okay? When your relational values become your convictions, you just can't justify spending the average adult 4 hours a day on a screen, okay? And spending the average adult 4 to 8 minutes a day in significant conversation with a child or a spouse. That for many of us, we are exchanging too much time to lifeless values. My fear is that you might be so busy connecting to the entire world when your entire world is sitting right there, wanting to connect. Okay. So identify your relational values. 3 is power down occasionally. Okay. Key word there, I just need to say occasionally. For some of you, you would not be able to make it. Otherwise, you'd be like, oh, I'd rather tithe more. No, so just occasionally. Last year, the American Psychological Stress Report said 75% of American adults, so this is the American Psychological Stress Report, okay, a condition of stress in our culture. 75% of American adults agree that periodically unplugging or taking a digital detox would be good for their mental health. And yet less than 25% have actually done it. The mental health world has actually developed coined a new phobia called nomophobia, which is no mobile, the fear of going without a mobile. And apparently in our culture, 50% of us have nomophobia. Now, think about that, 50%. That's all of you, okay? That's all of you that are afraid to go through life, not us. Over here, this is you, okay? You're afraid to go through life without your phone. The rest of you, you're doing fine, okay? But, you know, to power down occasionally. And typically, we don't chuckle at addictions, but for some reason, people will admit that they're nomophobic. They're like, oh, I do, well, at least I'm not a drug addict or an alcoholic or into porn. I just love my phone, okay? Well, I know, I get it. I like mine a lot too. But when you power down occasionally, it's good for your heart. It's good for your soul. It's good for your mind. It's good for your faith. And it's great for relationships. So if you want some suggestions, here they are. Here's where to power down occasionally. 1, at church. Okay? Try your power button. See how it works. Okay? Okay, at church. 2 would be at the table when other people are there. 3 might be before bed. Don't take it into your bedroom or bed. Just shut it down. 4, in the car. Some of you ladies, you complain that your husband or boyfriend, they don't talk to you. And then when you're driving in the car, while he's driving, you're texting or checking Facebook. That is the best time to engage a man in conversation. You know why? He doesn't have to look at you, all right? He doesn't have to feel your guilt. Guys will tell you this. No, I'd rather talk in the car because I got to just keep, because the guilt goes way down, okay? You think I'm making that up. I'm not making that up. That's true. I actually just finished a book called To Have and to Hold, Strengthening Your Marriage in a Phone-Obsessed Culture. And here's what I've done, is I've taken the habits that we fall in love with our phone, and I said, what if we did those in our marriage? I mean, think about it. What do we do with our phone? We pay attention to it first thing in the morning. Would that work in marriage? We touch it a lot, okay? We spend money on it. We take it to private places. I mean, there are so many things we do with our phone that could help your marriage. Now, finally, is you want to be about your Father's business, and you're going to figure this out. You're not just going to go, oh, that was good. I know it's a good message for somebody else. Is you figure out how do you install speed bumps. Now, what is a speed bump? We all know what a speed bump is. It's a small obstacle that is intended to slow you down, right? Now, what if you apply that principle to your phone? I actually have a friend who has a phone jail, and in his kitchen, this is their speed bump. And so they get home and they put it in the jail. Now, I know that my phone can rob me of listening. My phone can rob me of asking questions. My phone could rob me of validating people. My phone can rob me of increasing other people's happiness. So I created a little speed bump that works for me. I just made a little sticker. I brought it to show you. Those of you up close, you can see it on the back of my phone. And it's just a sticker that I use, and reminds me, like when I'm just to, can you tell what it is? Be present, okay? Yeah, I know, it's cute. Some of you are like, bumble gift? I don't know, like stinger package, buzz box. I mean, I realize it can go a lot of different ways, but for a relationship to win, okay? For a relationship to win, for people to feel valued, for happiness to increase, presence and tension are required. And here's your takeaway, okay? Last fill-in is presence clearly communicates you matter to me. You want to be countercultural? There it is. This is what our world needs. Our world needs to feel like they matter. Because here's what I found. When people matter to you, here's what you do. You treat them different. When they matter to you, you extend grace more freely. When people matter to you, you love them deeper. And as a result of that presence, they become happier and they actually become more alive. But every time I'm with somebody, and for whatever reason I'm here, this is communicating, this is more important to me right now than you are. And that's not the Jesus way. Friends, it may be culturally acceptable to do all this, but culture's not our model. Okay, Jesus is. And Jesus valued people with his time, with his words, with his attention, with his love, with his compassion. And in doing so, he communicated, you matter to me. So really, to sum up this whole 4-week series, to be countercultural is to be like Jesus. And to be like Jesus is to be present with people. I want to be more like Jesus. I want that for you too. So this week, let's be about our Father's business, okay? You ready for that? Yeah, so Jesus, that is our prayer.